is part 3 of our identification of the Jewish people. We've been detailing the history of both the Ashkenazi Jews and the Sephardic Jews, and in part 2 we identified the Sephardic Jews, that their origin is in ancient Babylon, from the province of the Sepharvaim people, and of course the word Sephardic comes from the Sepharvaim, and that these Sephardic Jews lived in Samaria and were always a separate people from the Israelites and the Judahites of the area. And we're going to be quoting today in this part 3, the story of Jacob and Esau. We're going to be proving that the Israelites were constantly at war with these Canaanites and Edomites, and that Yahweh instructed our people Israel to never have marriages with them, never be like them, never have anything to do with them. However, as we found out in 2 Kings chapter 17, our people never really spent a lot of time obeying Yahweh's commandments, and that's why we have such a history of trouble. Because whenever we refuse to obey Yahweh, He punishes us in various ways. And of course, the disobedience itself is often punishment in itself. Well, because when we intermarry with non-Israelite peoples, we pick up their traits, we pick up their diseases, and we pick up their habits, and start behaving like them. And obviously, Yahweh does not want us to behave like them. He wants us to behave like Israelites, like His people, like His chosen people, Israel. So, we're going to cover in part 3 an aspect of the Bible which is again given short shrift or totally ignored by Judeo-Christianity. And it's also ignored by the Jews, because the Jews do not want you to know about these things. They don't want you to know about the clear distinction between the Israelites and the Edomites. Our story begins in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. The very famous quotations which the Jews claim to be about themselves, but which is not at all about the Jews. So I'm going to quote Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. Now Yahweh had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land I will show thee. And of course, that land was Canaan land. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Now these are the unconditional promises that the descendants of Abraham would be a great people. They would be a company of nations, and that Abraham himself would be a father of many nations. Verse 3, And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now he's talking to Abraham here. He's not talking to any Jews. Let me repeat this. He is talking to Abraham. He is not talking to the Jews. So these verses, in no way, shape, or form do they apply to the Jewish people. Because Abraham had 3 classes of descendants. The Ishmaelites, who are known as the Arabs today. The descendants of Isaac, through whom the covenants passed, who are known as the Anglo-Saxons today. And the sons of Keturah, who were sent east, and today are known as the Indo-Aryans. Obviously, none of these 3 groups are Jews. So this prophecy, Genesis 12:3, is fraudulently used by the Jews to apply to themselves, which it does not. Let's go to Genesis 17 and see how this story continues. Again, none of these things... Oh, and I should mention, the Jewish people have never been a blessing to any nation in which they have dwelt. And this is why in the history of the Jewish people, they have been expelled from virtually every Christian nation in their history. So if they're a blessing, why are they constantly being expelled? Why are they constantly considered to be a pestilence? and a curse wherever they go. They admit these things. The Jews admit that the other nations have expelled them and that they have not blessed the nations that they've dwelt in. They admit these things. So this blessing given to Abraham does not apply to the Jews at all. Genesis 17, verses 1 through 7. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, Yahweh appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be thou perfect. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. He will be the father of many nations, which is not true of the Jews. The Jews have been a small nation throughout history. In fact, you can't even say that they have been a nation, because they have been wanderers and what's the term? Vagabonds in other nations, wandering to and fro from one nation to another, none of which they built. The Jews have not built any nations, not a single one, not even the Israeli state, because they stole that from the Palestinians. So the Jewish people have not built a single nation in the history of the world. They cannot possibly be the descendants of Abraham that are being mentioned here. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. How many nations have the Jews founded? 0. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be called Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. That's what the word Abraham means, father of many nations. Verse 6, And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. The Jews don't have any kings at all in their entire history. They have no kings except for Herod and his 3 or 4 successors. Other than that, the Jews have had no kings. And Herod was not an Israelite. He was an Edomite, as we will prove. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee. Thy seed after thee, meaning your direct descendants, Abraham, your direct descendants and nobody else. To be for an everlasting covenant. An everlasting covenant. I stress that for the Judeo-Christians who teach that the covenant that Yahweh made with his people, the Abrahamites and the Israelites and the Anglo-Saxons, somehow changed at the New Testament with the terms of the New Covenant. No, they did not change at all. Because you got the identification of Israel wrong. You believe that the Jews are Israel. And of course, the Jews did reject Messiah. But we Israelites did not. And because we are the true Israelites, the new covenant applies to us. And we were redeemed, but the Jews rejected the terms of the New Testament precisely because they're not Israelites. That covenant had nothing to do with them. This is an everlasting covenant. So if you teach that this covenant was changed, you're calling God a liar. Verse 8, And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So that land belongs to us. It belongs to us. It doesn't belong to the Jews. In fact, we gave it to them because the British Empire is actually one of the Commonwealth nations prophesied here, one of the many nations coming from the loins of Abraham. And it was the British who liberated Palestine from the Turks and claimed the British Mandate. So it was put back into our possession. Yahweh gave it back to us after first it was conquered by the Romans, and then by the Muslims, and then by the Turks. And it was still possessed, and that entire territory was possessed by the Arabs in the interim. Okay? So, but it belongs to us. It doesn't belong to the Jews. And when Netanyahu goes on television and says, oh, we Jews, that this land from the river of Egypt to Tigris and Euphrates, Eretz Israel, belongs to us, that's history's biggest lie. He knows that he's not an Israelite. He's in fact a Khazar Jew. So this is just part of the great deception, Revelation 12:9, that the Jews engage in constantly, and the world swallows this nonsense whole, hook, line, and sinker, because they hear it so often with the Jewish control of the media and control of the publishing industry. We never hear anybody contradict these lies. So you may be hearing the contradiction of these lies for the first time in your life, and praise Yahweh if you are hearing this at all, because the Jews are doing everything in their power to prevent you from getting this knowledge. Now we're going to continue in Genesis chapter 25, because I want to prove to you that only Abraham's direct descendants are the recipients and inheritors of these covenants. Verse 5, and Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac, but unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward unto the east country. Now why did he do this? Because the covenants were to proceed through Isaac. That's why he sent Ishmael away. That's why he sent the sons of Keturah away. So the sons of Hagar and the sons of Keturah were sent away, and only Isaac remained, because the covenants were to proceed through Isaac, not through these other sons. Verse 20, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padanaram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now, of course, this means she was a Shemite. Rebekah was a Shemite. Verse 21, and Isaac entreated Yahweh for his wife, because she was barren. And Yahweh was entreated of him. And Rebekah, his wife, conceived. And the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of Yahweh. So you have to picture, now remember, Rebekah is a flesh and blood woman. This is not mythology. This is not made up stuff. This is biblical history. If the Bible says it happened, it happened. Rebekah had twins, 2 boys. And they struggled within her, so you have to try to put yourself in Rebekah's place. You're feeling in your belly the 2 boys duking it out. They're wrestling with each other. And she's saying, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And here is God's answer. He says, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Okay? Well, let me finish this section. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb, and the first came out red, all over like an hairy garment. And they called his name Esau. And after that came out his brother, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. So, 2 nations. 2 nations. Not just 2 twin sons, but 2 nations are to come out of Rebekah's womb. The Edomites, the descendants of Esau, and the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob. 2 completely different nations have come out of Rebekah's womb. How often has your minister informed you of this fact? So, let's fast forward. Jacob and Esau are twin brothers, and of course, Esau is the older. But the prophecy says that the older shall serve the younger. How did this all come about? Well, we know that when Jacob was in the field, because Jacob became a farmer, Esau rejected farming, and he was actually a highwayman. Now let's go into the story of Jacob receiving the inheritance from Esau and how this came about. And the Bible tells us, and the boys grew up, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison. In other words, Esau was a hunter who brought back plenty of game for his father Isaac to eat. But Rebekah loved Jacob. And Jacob sowed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint." And therefore was his name called Edom. Okay, so Esau's name is changed to Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright." And Esau said, "Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me this day." And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Now the churches and the Jews too will teach you that Jacob somehow tricked Esau into this deal. There's no trickery involved here. Esau came out of the field. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright. If you want to eat my pottage, sell me your birthright." Simple deal. There's no trickery involved. If Esau had any brains, he never would have done this. But we'll find out why he did this. The record of why he did this is not contained in the Bible. It's contained in the book of Jasher. And I will quote that very, very shortly. But the important thing is that Esau sold his birthright to Jacob, and it was a fair deal, a done deal. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Very important point. Esau despised his birthright. He counted his birthright as meaning nothing. He discounted his birthright. That's not a very intelligent thing to do. And any of you Israelites, if you despise your birthright, despise your Israelite heritage, you are doing the exact same thing that Esau did. And you will be judged accordingly. That's what the Bible tells us. So in the book of Jasher, chapter 27, we are given the details of why Esau was faint. The Bible tells us he was faint and on the point to die. But why he was at this stage, we're not told, but the book of Jasher explained. Chapter 27, verse 1. And Esau, at that time after the death of Abraham, frequently went in the field to hunt. And Nimrod, king of Babel, the same was Amraphel, also frequently went with his mighty men to hunt in the field, and to walk about with his men in the cool of the day. And Nimrod was observing Esau all the days, for a jealousy was formed in the heart of Nimrod against Esau all the days. So Nimrod saw Esau moving about the countryside, and there was an enmity, or the Jasher says a jealousy arose between them. And on a certain day Esau went into the field to hunt, and he found Nimrod walking in the wilderness with his 2 men. So Nimrod with his 2 assistants doing some hunting. And all his mighty men and his people were with him in the wilderness, but they removed at a distance from him, and they went from him in different directions to hunt. And Esau concealed himself from Nimrod, and he lurked for him in the wilderness. So he set up an ambush for Nimrod. And Nimrod and his men that were with him did not know him. And Nimrod and his men frequently walked about in the field at the cool of the day, and to know where his men were hunting in the field. And Nimrod and 2 of his men that were with him came to the place where they were. And when Esau started suddenly from his lurking place, drew his sword, hastened and ran to Nimrod and cut off his head. And Esau fought a desperate fight with the 2 men that were with Nimrod, and when they called out to him, Esau turned to them and smote them to death with his sword. And all the mighty men of Nimrod who had left him to go to the wilderness heard the cry at a distance, and they knew the voices of those 2 men, and they ran to know the cause of it, when they found their king and the 2 men that were with him lying dead in the wilderness. And when Esau saw the mighty men of Nimrod coming at a distance, he fled, and thereby escaped. And Esau took the valuable garments of Nimrod, which Nimrod's father had bequeathed to Nimrod, and with which Nimrod prevailed over the whole land, and he ran and concealed them in his house. And Esau took these garments and ran into the city on account of Nimrod's men. And he came into his father's house wearied and exhausted from fight, and he was ready to die through grief when he approached his brother Jacob and sat before him. So these details fill in the missing part of why Esau was faked. He was running away from Nimrod's men who were chasing him. And it's quite obvious that Esau thought they might catch up with him and kill him. And this is why he so quickly and easily sold his birthright to Jacob. You cannot blame Jacob for Esau's stupidity and for Esau daring to cut off the head of Nimrod. That's a very daring act. And the book of Jasher tells us furthermore that Esau was a highwayman who would rob people along the road. So Esau was not your best character of moral standing whatsoever. So we find out from the book of Genesis that Esau despised his birthright, and the book of Jasher tells us why he did so. He was afraid he was going to die momentarily. So you cannot blame you cannot blame Jacob for the sins of Esau. Now let's continue to Deuteronomy chapter 7, because we're going to find out that the Israelites were forbidden to intermarry with these Canaanites and Edomites, the Edomites being the descendants of Esau, Edom. Okay, and Genesis chapter 6 tells us all about these descendants of Esau, who had a separate civilization in the area of Mount Seir, and they were the enemies of Israel throughout their entire existence. And as I've said, they are still our enemies even today. It's just that we have misidentified them as the Israelites of the Old Testament, when in fact are the Edomites of the Old Testament. Okay, so in Deuteronomy chapter 7, I'm going to quote verses 1 through 7. So that you know the law, which our people have been disobeying, to our hurt. When Yahweh thy Elohim shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when Yahweh your Elohim shall deliver them from before thee, thou shalt smite them, and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them. So, Christians, the modern New Testament Christians, so-called, look at these verses and say, oh, well, Yahweh is that old vengeful God. We don't believe in that God. We believe in Jesus, the God of love. Well, if you actually read the New Testament, Jesus is coming back to destroy these very same people. They're the terrors of Matthew chapter 13. It So there's no difference between the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament. It's just that the justice has been delayed from the first coming to the second coming. That's nonsensical teaching that Jesus told us to carry a sword. He told us to carry a sword, and he will judge his enemies, and his vesture will be dipped in blood. Now that's nonsense, what these so-called New Testament Christians teach. I want to quote from Wycliffe. Wycliffe translated the Hebrew Bible into English, directly from the Hebrew. And this is his commentary on Deuteronomy chapter 7, which is much more informed and intelligent than what the Judeo-Christians teach today. Verses 1 through 5, his commentary. In the book of the covenant produced at Sinai, there was promulgated a program of conquest and extermination against the Canaanite people and covetous. Thereby, the ancient prophecy in which Noah pronounced Canaan accursed and the servant of Shem would be fulfilled. The hour of divine judgment having come, Moses now charged Israel with the execution of that program. Everybody and everything in Canaan that was consecrated to idols rather than to the service of God must be consecrated to the wrath of God. 7 nations. In such lists elsewhere, the number varies from 3 to 10. The 7 specified here possibly is a figure of the completeness. The Hebrew root HRM, translated utterly destroy, in the major English versions means primarily to devote and hence ban and extirpate. The harem principle comes to full and final manifestation in the judgments of hell. So the judgment of the Canaanites began here, but it will be completed at the second coming. Some people take offense at God's command to Israel to exterminate the Canaanites, as though it represented some Christian ethics. Actually, they are taking offense at the theology and religion of the Bible as a whole. Well said. Let me repeat this. Actually, they are taking offense at the theology and religion of the Bible as a whole. The New Testament, as well as the Old, warns men concerning the realm of the everlasting ban, where the reprobates devoted to wrath must magnify the justice of God, whom they have hated. There are still people today who hate Yahweh. You think Yahweh is going to tolerate them forever? He's not going to tolerate them forever. That's why he established the judgment day. Since Old Testament theocracy in Canaan was a divinely appointed symbol of the consummate kingdom of God, there is found, and of course the religion that the Israelites practice, not the Canaanites practice, there is found in connection with it an intrusive anticipation of the ethical pattern that will obtain at the final judgment and beyond. So, what was Yahweh doing? He was using the Israelites as his tool of judgment against these evil Canaanites. Now, Yahweh could have done this himself. He could have brought a plague of hail, or he could have had a tidal wave come off the Mediterranean and swamp over the Canaanite people. But he wanted the Israelite people to understand what their duty was. What he was expecting them to do was to be his battle axe, his instrument of judgment against these heathen, evil people, the Canaanites. In other words, they were unredeemable. They were so evil that they could not be redeemed, and therefore Yahweh instructed his people Israel to exterminate them. Continuing with Wycliffe. Moreover, the extermination of the Canaanites and their cultic installations, namely destroy their altars, burn their images, was necessary if Israel's calling to positive consecration to God in living service was to be fulfilled. For because of Israel's frailty, there were a small number of people compared to their enemies at this time. The proximity of the Canaanites would lead to the dissolution of Israel's spiritual distinctiveness and national distinctiveness, to foreign and idolatrous allegiances, and hence to Israel's own destruction. The program of conquest is thus a consistent application of the principle of consecration, that is, the consecration of the people of Israel, dedicating us to Yahweh, and only we are so dedicated. But of course, we already found out, as Wycliffe anticipated, that the Israelites would not do a thorough job, and they would leave a remnant of Canaanites to make life difficult for us. And this is prophesied in the book of Numbers, chapter 33, verse 55. And these words are so true of our experience vis-a-vis the Jews. This is one of the greatest prophecies in the Bible, where Yahweh tells the Israelites, quote, "But if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those which ye let remain of them shall be pricks in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and shall vex you in the land wherein ye dwell. Moreover, it shall come to pass that I shall do unto you as I thought to do unto them." So if we do like them, he's going to punish us just like he asked us to punish them. And of course, Deuteronomy 33:55 has come fully to pass throughout our history, because wherever we true Israelites have gone, the Jews have been pricks in our eyes and thorns in our sides ever since. The Jews will simply not leave us alone. Now, we already covered Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 23 through 29, because we stressed that in the previous section, proving that we are not to intermarry with these Canaanites. Deuteronomy chapter 7 also tells us they were not to intermarry with Canaanites, that we are not even to have any covenants with them. But Solomon violated this principle when he married Canaanite wives. So now we're going to talk about how these Sephardic Jews, these Canaanite Jews, these Edomite Jews, came to covet Israel, came to covet our land, our territory, and our religion. Now, we talked about them beginning to utilize their own version of our religion in 2 Kings chapter 17. But the book of Ezekiel prophesied that there would be a time when these Edomites would covet our land and our religion. Okay, so Ezekiel chapter 35 and 36 cover this prophecy, and it's directly related to the Herodians who assumed control of Judea just before the days of Christ. So I'm going to quote Ezekiel chapter 35, verses 1 through 15. In fact, that's the whole chapter of Ezekiel 35. "Moreover, the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Mount Seir, and prophesy against it." Mount Seir is where the Edomites lived. "And say unto it, Thus saith Yahweh Elohim, Behold, Mount Seir, I am against thee, and I will stretch out mine hand against thee, and I will make thee most desolate. I will lay thy cities waste, and thou shalt be a desolate people, and thou shalt know that I am God, I am Yahweh." Well, when Yahweh starts, slaying your people before your very eyes, and he says he's going to do that, and when it finally happens, that's when you know that he keeps his promises. Verse 5, "Because thou hast had a perpetual hatred, and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, in the time that their iniquity had an end." So what Yahweh is telling us is that whenever the Edomites had the opportunity, they would attack our people Israel and slay us. "Because thou hast had this perpetual hatred." he will ultimately judge the Edomites. Therefore, as I live, saith Yahweh Elohim, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee. Since thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee. In other words, since they have not rejected the principle of killing and murdering, they will ultimately be killed themselves. Thus will I make Mount Seir most desolate, and cut off from it him that passeth out it, and him that returneth. Well, who's coming and going from Mount Seir? The Edomite Jews. That's who he's talking about here. And I will fill his mountain with his slain men. In thy hills and in thy valleys and on all thy rivers shall they fall that are slain with the sword. I will make thee perpetual desolations, and thy cities shall not return, and ye shall know that I am Yahweh. So Yahweh has actually been judging these Edomite Jews perpetually since this prophecy was issued. And in fact, these Jews today inhabit Mount Seir. They have taken possession of Mount Seir again as Ashkenazis and as Edomites, as Sephardim. This is the true fulfillment of the return. The Jews have returned to Mount Seir. Verse 10, because thou hast said, these two nations and these two countries shall be mine. What's he talking about? The house of Israel, house of Judah, Samaria and Judea. These two nations and these two countries shall be mine, and we will possess it. Whereas Yahweh was there. So, here are these Sephardic Edomite Jews declaring their intention to take possession of the two houses, the territory of the two houses. Therefore, as I live, saith Yahweh, I will even do according to thine anger and according to thine envy, which thou hast used out of thy hatred against them, and I will make myself known among them when I have judged thee. Well, their full judgment has not occurred yet. It's about to come, because the Ashkenazi and Edomite Jews have taken possession of Palestine for a second time. They did it the first time in the days of Herod, and the fulfillment of Yahweh's displeasure, anger against the Edomites and the Ashkenazis is yet to come at a future date, but we believe it's going to be very shortly. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll cover the fulfillment, the first fulfillment of this prophecy that these Edomites are going to possess the land of Israel and Judah. And after this break, we'll complete the story of Yahweh's hatred and judgment against Esau.